Welcome to Let Me Know How It Is, a pop culture podcast about animation, TV, movies, comics, and all things geek. This is part 2 of our celebration of Superman's 85th anniversary. I'm Zach Slater.
I'm Frank Melman.
And I'm Clifton.
April saw the anniversary of when Action Comics #1 went on sale, the first appearance of Superman. Last week in part 1, we went in depth on Action Comics #1, as well as bad guys and classic stories, so check it out if you missed it. But here in part 2, we're going to look at his supporting cast, Superman's formative years in continuity, as well as we'll delve into some of our favorite creators and some lesser-known Superman stories. I'll also have some mini questions to sprinkle in here and there for fun. So let's start off with the supporting characters. What do you think?
Jimmy. Jimmy Olsen.
That's your favorite?
Probably. I mean, it's hard to beat Jimmy Olsen. I mean,
right.
It's one of those, it's Superman's pal. It's in a way he gets into trouble, but not the same way as like Lois in a lot of those early stories.
Mm-hmm.
And he also has adventures of his own, it feels like.
Right.
That don't revolve around exposing Superman's identity or and I think for me it's the whole Jimmy Olsen Silver Age thing.
Mm-hmm.
Where so much of the Silver Age stuff that I think about a lot of times is like, oh yeah, that's a Jimmy Olsen story. That's not a Superman or an Action Comic story.
Like the first appearance of Darkseid.
Right, like that kind of stuff. Right, exactly, like that kind of stuff where it's not like, oh yeah, that didn't happen in that particular issue. No, it's Jimmy. Jimmy Olsen's the one.
Right.
I mean, I don't get me wrong, I like all of the supporting cast. There's not one supporting cast member I'm like, this is terrible. But, I think Jimmy's the most versatile of all of them. I mean, Lois, don't get me wrong, a lot of Superman's girlfriend, a lot of those stories are goofy Silver Age too, but
right.
It might also be that like Kurt Swan drew a lot of those too.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of Legion stories tied in with Jimmy as well, like being like Elastic Lad and being part of the Legion.
Right.
That I remember reading in a lot of the digest stuff, as well as the fact that as much as I like Kurt Schaffenberger, he did like most of Lois stuff, and that that stuff has a distinct look to me that I don't prefer to Kurt Swan.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be it too.
Okay.
But I mean, I like, who doesn't, again, like you guys can say yours, but that's my first. I'll say Jimmy.
Yeah.
I have a question about Jimmy. How old is he supposed to be? What's the age range you think works?
Well, child labor laws were different back then.
Right.
I don't know. I always thought, to me, he should be, I think, just out of college, maybe. Always worked for me.
Okay.
I think he should be in his early 20s.
Right. 21, 22, give or take.
Maybe at the latest 22.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't think he should be much older because, again, it's, he was always the Cub reporter. That was like the moniker he got stuck with, was he was Jimmy Olsen, Cub reporter, or photographer or whatever.
So it was like a real position at the Daily Planet. It wasn't like an intern or
right. I mean,
or newsboy or something.
Well, because sometimes it seems like he's a newsie, right? He should be running around. Like he gets up in the morning, he gathers his papers, he goes down it's like Wuck Street, read all about what's going on in the Daily Planet, and it's not really his thing. I mean, he's in the bullpen.
Yeah.
Right. The chief knows his name.
Right, exactly.
That's pretty important, right?
Sure. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I don't think it's a matter of he's certainly not I guess you could say he's a peer, but he's not an equal. But again, like Clark here's the thing. Clark and Lois never ever, that's one thing I love about all of Lois's dismissive stuff with Clark. She's never that way as far as I know to Jimmy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not even like a maternal thing. It's more like, hey, come on, I need you. Let's go do this. Let's go get into trouble together.
Right.
At least that's what, that's my experience with it. I think, like in the animated series, he's played a little younger, right?
Yeah, I can't tell.
I don't know. I mean, that's truthfully, that's why I was asking a little bit, because I think he can read like high school student.
Right.
And
that's
I've
what I got with
some instances like, I've watched so little of it, but I want to say like Lois and Clark, the Dean Cain, Terry Hatcher show, like he's like a full blown adult.
Right.
In that show, like.
Well, it's like what's his name? The actor that plays him, that was Marty McFly's brother in Back to the Future. In the Christopher Reeve movie, he's pretty much an adult there, right?
Oh, right. I'll never remember that actor's name, but yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
And like Supergirl, in the Supergirl show, like he's pretty old. He's been around.
Oh, for sure.
Pretty old,
yeah.
But you get what I mean, like.
But that's the thing. There's like, it's kind of like you're not calling that guy Superman's pal,
right?
like again, that guy's a full blown adult.
what I liked about that, like the Jimmy Olsen in the Supergirl show, is that like he's adult. He appears to be older than Supergirl. Like he's been in the professional world for a little while before she gets into it kind of in the start of her show. But it's that like he's cool and like suave and confident. And I was like, if you grew up like being Superman's pal, like that would get you some confidence.
Sure.
Like once you grew up, once you got a little older.
Yeah.
So I kind of liked that take on it. But yeah, generally speaking, in the comics and then in the Superman the Animated Series, he does come off as whatever age Supergirl is supposed to be in the comics and in the animated series when she shows up. And then they're always, I mean, that's kind of vague. So it could be somewhere between, upper teens to college age. That's where I'd put him in that show in animated series. He does not seem old. He does not seem out of college.
It's like if I was casting an actor whose name I don't know, there's the kid that's in T2 that's like a redheaded kid with a mullet. I'm like, that's Jimmy Olsen from the animated series.
Kenny Cooksey.
Kind of, yeah. Right,
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's Budwick from Salute Your Shorts.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, that kid. That kid is definitely Jimmy Olsen from the animated series. Because doesn't he have a mullet in that too?
Probably, yeah. Everyone had a mullet in those shows. Mullets for everybody in the 90s.
Mullets all around. But yeah, I think Jimmy to me is, in my mind, he's old enough to wear, like he's wearing like sporting the suit, and like Silver Age Jimmy is the one that I always think of, wear the bow tie and
right.
in the bullpen and always around. And it's kind of like he's, like I said, he's a peer. They rely on him, but he's I feel still like Jimmy's like going to get sandwiches and coffee for people at times.
Yeah.
I definitely think Perry sends him on that stuff, but yeah, that's my thing. I think Jimmy is like one of those indispensable members of that, because I think in the right writer's hands, I think Jimmy is a font, a fountain of story ideas and story stuff that you could do.
Yeah,
right.
No, I agree. He's essential. I think.
Yeah.
To me, he's definitely essential. I think he's interesting in the sense that I think he can be wildly different depending on who's writing him while being exactly the same. You know what I mean? Like everybody knows what notes you're supposed to hit with Jimmy.
Right.
And as long as you get those, but around that, you can play around with him a little bit and make things a little different.
I'm going to recommend a Jimmy Olsen book that I recommended on our very, very first episode ever.
I was going to say.
When we did our very first take on like single issue comic, like our favorite single issues of comics out there for people to read. And there's a Jimmy Olsen #1 is what the comic it's a kind of a reprint because it started as backup stories and then was collected into one oversized like 80-page issue called Jimmy Olsen #1 in 2011, written by Nick Spencer. And it's just like I forget how many chapters it is, but short stories about Jimmy. They're kind of tied together, but are also kind of like a little bit standalone. And if you just want to know who Jimmy Olsen is and have like the fun, crazy Jimmy Olsen adventures from the Silver Age and see how he connects to everybody in Superman's like orbit without Superman actually being there, it's a great one issue. So I would recommend that one.
Okay.
It is. It's really good. Really, really good. My take on him was always that like his ability is what brought him to the dance. Right? So like, I don't know if you guys have ever seen Rear Window. There's a great bit in Rear Window, the Hitchcock movie about the guy with the broken leg who's peering out his window.
Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, Jimmy Stewart, and thinks thinks he witnessed the murder, but he's not sure of it. Right? That's the take of that movie. But so I say that because there's at one point where they explain sort of like how he broke his leg, and he's a photographer, and so you see sort of a pan of couple of pictures that he took, and one of them is like a picture of a racetrack crash where like he's on the racetrack and you see sort of like a progression of pictures of like this car like coming at him. Right? He's got this like amazing shot of this wreckage, and that's a little Jimmy Olsen to me. Like that's how I see him. It's like he's the guy willing to stand on the racetrack to get the picture at the last possible second and then run away.
Right.
I can see that.
Yeah,
you know,
I can't remember in Rear Window. Is that how he broke his leg?
Yeah.
I can't rember. Okay.
Yeah. It's implied. Right. It's implied that that's what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
It's Hitchcock. It's subtle. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's always been my read of Jimmy. And that's, like I said, like that's why I think Perry White, the chief, knows his name, knows the name of this, 16 to 20-year-old kid that they employ as a photographer.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because here's the thing about Jimmy, I never question his ability to do the job. Like, that's never, like, whenever I think of Jimmy Olsen, I am never like, well, I don't know if he's a very good photographer. I'm like, no, he probably knows all the photography stuff that he could possibly know at that age. And then some, I would think. But, you know, that's the thing I always think about Jimmy Olsen. I'm like, no, there's no question about his qualifications. It's just one of those things where I think he might be one of those people that's just used to hanging around older people, comfortable around older people, and, like, not enough of a you know, screw up that he's able to hang. But I think, like, unquestionably, like you said, I think Perry has him around because he gets good shots.
Right. Clifton, any last thoughts on Jimmy Olsen?
No, just that, like, I love those Silver Age stories where he's, you know, gets turned into a giant iguana man or or whatever else he has to do on those.
Yep.
Those are great. I love them. And then his Fourth World stuff, like, that's you alluded to that before, Zach, but yeah, like, everything Jack Kirby at DC from, like, Dark Side and stuff came through, like, Jimmy Olsen, because Jimmy Olsen had a book that was running at that time. That's where a lot of the stuff was introduced into the DC universe. It was through that corner via Jimmy Olsen to Superman.
Nice looking book too.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah, I just because we were hitting supporting characters, I want to touch upon Lois, but I don't want to spend too much time on her because we've talked about her a lot in other episodes and stuff like that. So, but I think, like, let's, you know, I'm a huge fan. Frank, Clifton, I know you guys are huge fans too. I think, you know, she's one of the best characters in all of comics. So yeah, so let's talk about Lois really quick, and then let's move on to some of the rest of the Planet staff.
I think in the writer's hands, I think that Lois easily makes the case of why he would be into her. Like, I think it's, I think a lot of times, you know, she's the short shrift, obviously, is what she was in the 50s and 60s, which was, you know, scheming to figure out who he was. But I like the Lois stories. I like a lot of, you know, Byrne's take on her. I thought was pretty, you know, as an independent woman who happened to be a talented reporter. I just think that it's one of those things where, like, when she's written well, she's such a great character. And that's the one thing I keep coming back to on a lot of this stuff is there's nothing you have to fix about Lois other than the fact, like, again, we saw in Action Comics 1, you know, it's all there. Stuff, a lot of the stuff that permeates throughout the time of the characters. So, but no, I think Dana Delaney in the animated series is great. I think Margot Kidder was great. I haven't watched a lot of the George Reeves stuff, but it's Noel Neal and somebody else, right? Can't remember the other actress's name. But that, again, it's one of those things where I think that the character, you know, is one of those characters at DC that, again, I think a lot of people want to write, but don't always have a great story for her. And I think that's what suffers, like, for me, with the character. I'm like, no, they're the ones that get her right, really get her right. And the other ones are like, I just want to do something with Lois.
Right.
Which I totally get. I would too. But
and I think it's the medium. That holds them back, right? Because you're in comics, you're expected to write a certain amount of punching and kicking.
Sure.
Right? And solving problems with fights and stuff like that. And you know, and you can't make her a superhero, even though I always joke around like she's my favorite, like, female superhero. Right. You know what I mean?
I think I think it's one of those things where I think one of the writers recently that got it really right was Tomasi. I think Tomasi's run of Superman, and I've said this before in other episodes, is the fact that it's Superman family with her and John and Clark, that she is able to do stuff and hold her own. And it's not so much that it definitely, like, you can feel the you can sort of feel the reality of it push a little,
right?
Because obviously they both have powers and she doesn't, but at the same time, you know, they're fighting the big things or the big monster or the robot or whatever, and she's on the ground, like, talking to the people and getting a groundswell of people support going, which I think is nice. So I think that he's one that really got her and really got her well.
Yeah. Well, he's a good writer too. I'm a big fan of a lot of his stuff. I think,
as am I.
You know, and we were talking, Frank, you and I offline. You know, I was going back and reading Event Leviathan, the Bendis book from, man, I don't know, maybe 4 years ago now at this point, right?
Right.
And that's very much shopped as, like, the world's greatest detectives are all working together to crack a case, and it's like Batman and The Question and Barbara Gordon's in there, and but like, and Lois, like, you know, among other, but like Lois is there in the room with them.
Right.
Like,
right.
you know, and I thought, and I just think that that's so cool that, like, you know, she's getting the props to be a plainclothes person in a room with superheroes.
Yeah.
and they're all, and they all like, and it's not at all a moment where like she's out of place. They're like, no, like,
right.
she's one of the smartest people on the planet.
Sure.
You know?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. When it comes to this sort of like sniffing stuff out, like, yeah. So no, Lois is great.
Yeah.
Phyllis Coates is the other
okay.
actress that was in
Very
the
good.
Superman serials with George Reeves.
God.
Was she first or second?
I think she's first. I think she is first, but I can't remember for sure.
Okay.
She did have a guest spot in a Lois and Clark episode,
Okay.
Mhm.
playing Ellen Lane.
And one of them is on, like, I know in the Christopher Reeves, Christopher Reeve, not
Right.
George Reeves, Christopher Reeves. When they're in the scene with the train where Clark runs across and does the, you know, outruns the train bit,
Okay.
she's on the train. Like, that's one thing is they put her in that.
Mm.
One of them. I can't remember which one. I think it's Noel Neal, but
That one might be Noel Neal.
yeah, love Lois. Lois is great.
Yeah.
Lois is, you know, again, it's one of those things where I know Devon, frequent guest and friend of the show, is a huge Lois mark. And that was one of the things I think we talked about at one point, was just the idea of, you know, it makes sense why he would want to be with her with all the stuff that he can do when you can see what she can do,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
you know? So, yeah, great character.
Yeah. All right. So who else is there? Supporting characters.
There's Perry. There's Perry.
Perry. Okay.
I like, and again, it's one of the things where I like with Perry where they take the tact of, he's not just, you know, a lot of times he can devolve into caricature of just being like a blustery, you know, kind of like the captain in the police precinct of like, I'm going to take your badge if you don't get this done.
Yeah.
And which isn't horrible, but I like it more when it's kind of like, no, at one point, you know, he was a beat reporter. Like he put his time in.
Right.
You know, I like what, you know, I think that, again, getting back to Byrne, I think Byrne does a pretty good job with the World of Metropolis, where you sort of see like there's a background between Perry and a younger Lex.
Right.
You know, I like that kind of stuff. I like the idea, almost like they do, kind of like they do with Slam Bradley in a lot of the Batman books. The idea that that there was a lot of stuff going on before there was anybody in a costume running around in the city, and Perry would know about that stuff.
Right.
You know, I think that's the way that character should be played more often. And unfortunately, I don't think he is, but I like the character a lot. You know, I think he sees the value in the people around him and sort of knows when to sort of like cheerlead for him at the same time, when to kick him in the ass about getting stuff done.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of many appearances from him in other media. In the comics, for sure, I do feel like, and probably animated series, probably, I do feel like they get that, where it's like he puts on the bluster because he's supposed to, but
Right.
like he trusts Clark in that, he trusts Lois in that, and will put on bluster, but is like knows they'll go out and get the story, like knows they'll go out and uncover the truth, so he just tolerates whatever they do because he knows it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But he just puts on that bluster anyway, because it's expected, because it's part of the role of editor-in-chief of the Daily Planet.
He's a character that represents sort of an ideal, kind of not dissimilar to the way that Superman himself does.
Right.
Mhm.
I think Perry is supposed to represent like journalistic integrity
Mhm.
Yeah.
and honesty and you know and getting the story right. And I think that that's like having a character who that's his history, Frank, like you said, who's walked the beat and done it himself and done it
Right.
well,
Right.
well enough to
Right.
be to be put in charge of the thing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that that's sort of key. And I think that he is a character that I do think doesn't get a lot of play anymore. I think that, you know, he's kind of like furniture sometimes.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
You know, maybe just kind of there to like explain some sort of like exploratory aspect of the story.
Right.
You know, and
To get the ball rolling and then
bark off
yeah.
assignments to get characters to where they're supposed to be for when Toyman attacks or whatever.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the character's got more juice than that.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I think he's one of the, like, again, I think it's a thing of, again, if you treat it as a character that has an actual history and actual background, I think that character does. In some ways, in my mind, and I don't think maybe I'm remembering a story or maybe I'm not, but to me, it's one of those things where he was the kind of the Lois of his day.
Uh-huh.
And he kind of like was, in my mind, I don't know if he like, I look at Perry as like the guy that got the job of being editor that really didn't want it.
Yeah.
But he was the best guy at the time when the other guy quit.
Right.
One of those type situations of like, the other guy's leaving. We don't have anybody else. We got to put a paper out. What are we going to do? And they all look to Perry.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's it exactly, I think, too. I mean, I hadn't thought about it in those exact words, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I was thinking about performances of the character over the years, and I like, I definitely like the one from the Christopher Reeve movies. I like, what was it? Jackie, I can't remember his name now. But I thought he was good. I thought he was, that's probably my first remembrance of a live action Perry White. But I also was going to say, as much as I'm kind of about Superman Returns as a movie, I like parts of it. I think I would have liked to have seen Frank Langella do a little more Perry White.
Sure. I thought he was pretty good. Lawrence Fishburne do a lot more.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, he's
right?
Larry Fishburne. Like, how could you not want more Lawrence Fishburne?
That's one of the like, I mean, that's one of the things that hurts me the most is you have him, and I'm like, wow, like there's a Perry finally with like a lot of gravitas that actually like can hold a scene himself, right? Like can hold the attention of a scene himself. Him being an A-lister himself, and it's just like it's all for nothing.
Right. Yeah, Jackie Cooper was the guy's name that played Perry White.
Yeah,
but yeah, I thought he was great. And then also we were talking about Jimmy Olsen, Mark McClure. That's the actor who played him in Back to the Future and played Jimmy Olsen. Yeah, he's Marty McFly's brother whose head's disappearing in the photo. Mm-hmm. But I think Perry, to me, I think in the 90s stuff, I want to say it was Wolfman, but I could be wrong. It might have been Dan Jurgens. Gave him a fair amount of stuff to do, but a lot of it was like family stuff, like his kid was getting into trouble, and Clark and Superman would have to help out. Or I think his wife, like got sick, and that was like the thing. And I'm like, as much as I understand that more human element of things, I think, while I don't need to see Perry out trying to get a story, I think Perry being like, no, do it this way because it, or just being like, again, a lot of times, like you said, I think a lot of times it's just, he's either furniture or he's a caricature.
Right. Yeah.
And I don't think he's, it's kind of like this. I think I'll put it this way: of the two newspaper men of Marvel and DC, Jonah is more fleshed out than Perry White, and I find that odd.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Jonah too, but I think it's really odd that they're more like Jonah human, like what's up with this guy's story, than there are for Perry White, and I really do think that's a really strange situation now that I think about it.
Yeah.
So where do we want to go next? We want to stay in the planet? Do we want to go to Smallville? Do we want to go to a bar or diner down the street in Metropolis? What do we want to do?
I mean,
you can be our travel guide,
right?
Sure. Yeah. Right.
Is there anyone left in the planet that you think? I mean, we can name everybody. Obviously, Cat Grant and Ron Troop, right? And
I think Cat Grant's a fun addition just for the fact that she's like, I mean, obviously, another character that can be easily devolve into caricature, but I like the idea of like when she's played genuine and she's like, no, I'm interested in Clark Kent. Dude's not a bad looking guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Lois can play her games and not liking him or not want him around, but she's like, no, let's go out and do something. And Clark's taken back like, whoa, what do you mean? I think that's a good bit. I like the addition of like Ron Troop. I thought Ron Troop was a good addition. I always like Steve Lombard.
Yeah,
Steve Lombard. I've always liked, he's kind of the
sports writer who's a blowhard.
Yeah, right, I mean, he's a bit Flash Thompson-y, but at the same time, he's not. And again, it's one of those things where, it gives, it allows Clark to sort of be. I think it humanizes Clark when he's sort of like, I'll take this guy's nonsense in public, but he's gonna fall down the steps. Like, I'm gonna tie his shoes together in 2 seconds at super speed, and he's gonna, trip over.
A strong gust of wind is gonna come along
and take that toupee right off his head.
I was gonna say, take the toupee off.
Yeah, that's I love that bit. I mean, some people say it's petty, and I'm like, that's fine. I think at the time Superman, again, when you get in the whole Boy Scout stuff, I'm like, you haven't read enough Superman if you just think he's a Boy Scout,
right?
Because there are times that Superman's just straight petty, and it's great. So,
I have a question. What was Cat Grant's position at the Daily Planet traditionally in the comics?
If I remember correctly, she was like their entertainment reporter, or their like like she would keep an eye on Lex and like people that were in the public eye. If I remember correctly, Or and then that was the thing was I think Lois was kind of catty towards her about being like she might be tabloidish.
Right. Like she's the gossip columnist.
Right. That kind of thing. But
wasn't she on air for a little bit too? Am I making that up?
I want to say yes.
Okay.
Like in the era when they were all on TV, when they're all like newscasters.
Yeah, there was like an era where the Daily Planet had like a news had a news show too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I can't remember. I know that like during this, I want to say during the 70s stuff, it was Clark and somehow Lana was the anchor. Mm-hmm. Just because of a million possible people to put on camera with Clark Kent in Clark Kent in Metropolis. Why not be his high school sweetheart or whatever from Smallville?
You know what? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
and
if I remember correctly,
it's making sense, right? Because she's an anchor in Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Right? Suddenly, okay, wow, that makes a lot of sense now. You just explained that to me.
Well, there you go. The more you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I remember correctly, I think we said last episode what it was. Let me look it up. What the Metropolis when he would go in it, because that was the thing was kind of like the newspapers back in the 70s was supposed to be passé and be dying, and it was supposed to be something that was going away.
Right.
But I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick because like I said, I've only read I've read 70s Superman is not my WGBS. That was what it was the station, so I had that right. But apparently he had like it says dozen plus years. I'm looking at he was on during the Bronze Age, and it was basically that way up until Crisis. I'm looking at. But I want to say it was him and Lana, but I could be wrong. Here we go. Saying Metropolis Station WMET, so maybe they were on competing stations. But I mean, I think it's a good segue into Smallville.
Right.
I didn't mean for it to be, but yeah. I like Lana.
Okay.
I think Lana's a character that, again, depending on who's writing her, she basically is Lois in the Silver Age for Superboy. Same thing where she's trying to get Clark to reveal his identity or admit it or catch him. Unlike Lois, she does get to join the Legion as an honorary member, as Insect Queen, which I thought was fun as a kid. She basically had insect power. She could basically use one power at a time. But yeah, I think the character's a fine character to use. I just don't think there's much that for a long time there wasn't much to distinguish her between herself and Lois. Like a lot of the stuff I know, like when they mix them up, is like, how are they going to scheme to get it figured out, or who's going to marry? In imaginary worlds, in imaginary story, there'd be like who's he actually going to marry and end up with.
Right. Lana's a bit of a tough one. I like the character a lot too, but I mean she's not used in the best. I don't know that she has a ton of character anymore, other than like I knew you in high school, right?
Right.
And
I guess the more, and I say recent within the last 20 or 30 years, is she's in on the secret for the longest time, right? That's the other thing about Lana is that she knows, depending on if it's because she knows in the animated series, right?
She does. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So and Burns got that bit where he basically, again, he doesn't mean it to be horrible, but he basically takes her on a flight and tells her, and then it's like, I'm leaving for Metropolis tomorrow. Right. It's like, oh, thanks.
See, in my head, I think the importance of the character lies in the fact I think she needs to break his heart.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right? I think that's kind of the thing that she in a way I think can display a weakness to Superman that's sort of like his heart breaks just like any one of us, right? And to me, like, she's kind of the one that got away, right? And then and then I think that's kind of like the hook of all the scenes where like you see them back together again. And it's like, wow, like look what Clark like turned himself into. Right.
Yeah, I can see that. But I know, like, for a while she was kind of like in a I wouldn't say a sham marriage, but she was in a marriage with like Pete Ross and in the like the 90s stuff, and it was kind of like that's how that I think he had a political career, and that's how he kept getting into trouble, and therefore Clark would have to step in, and it was sort of this stepping in for help out, but at the same time there was something still between them from the time they were in high school together. But I don't know, it's one of those things where I do like the character, but again, if I peel back the layers, if I really look at it with a fine a fine microscope on it. I agree with you. There's not much character there.
Yeah.
I think Smallville and some other stuff has tried to give her more of, and Smallville just goes, badass on what, I mean, in a weird way. I mean, granted, it's if you slapped the Silver Age label on it, I probably wouldn't be so harsh to it, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on in Smallville that you're like, what?
Yeah.
For her.
Yeah, there's weird storylines. Like she's in high school, but like owns a business in the town, and it's a little strange.
Yeah.
And Pete's kind of a funny one too. He's like one where like I feel like people forget about completely, and I think I remember he was used as recently as like 2000, 2001 when Lex was president in the books. Like Pete was his vice president.
Right. That's it. Yeah, I forgot that part. You're absolutely right. But I think that's one of those things that doesn't. I think is kind of for me. The one note about Pete was that he found out his Clark's identity by accident, and then the Legion again. It keeps coming back to Legion for me.
We'll get to that.
The Legion keeps coming back, and the Legion says, hey, we appreciate the fact that you never did anything with this. You never betrayed him over it. You basically protect the secret so he could do what he needed to do. And inadvertently, you helped save a lot of lives because you kept his secret for him, right?
Right.
And again, I don't think that's one of those things that gets, I mean, there should be more to the character than just, hey, you kept your mouth shut. You were a good soldier for Clark Kent, Superboy. But, I still think that's one of those things where when I think about the character, that's what I think of.
Sure. All right, we got to move on.
All right.
All right. We still haven't gotten to the parents, Ma and Pa, which we've talked about a lot in other episodes. I mean, if you listen to the show, like, that we think the Kents are super, super important.
Absolutely.
His morality comes from them.
Yeah. Well, and again, his humanity. It's one of those things of, I think a lot of a lot of times, especially now, not so much, I think, in the early stuff, is in the Golden Age or Silver Age, that we don't, is the idea of without the Kents, there really is no touchstone for him. Like, I don't think, like, a lot of times Krypton is portrayed as being kind of cold and sterile. Byrne definitely does it, but I think when you take the idea of like 50s sci-fi and really apply it to them being alien, the humanity's not there, right? And I think the Kents are the thing that grounds him and makes him much more human, not just Kryptonian.
Yeah, for sure.
I think a lot of times when stories go awry, they try to, clip out the Kents or diminish their role. And I think that if you really want him to be what he is, I think it's kind of a bad idea to do that.
Right.
Yeah. And then heading down to the bar down the street in Metropolis, Bibbo Bibowski.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Okay, that one people aren't going to know. So tell us who Bibbo is.
So Bibbo is just, he's a bar owner in some versions. In other versions, it's a diner, depending on, the diner tends to be if it's animated and they can't do a bar. Right. He's, what is he, like an ex-football player, right, Frank?
I think so. I think it's I think in the Jurgen stuff, he's definitely an ex. He played some kind of sport. Got hurt, couldn't make it to the pros. Was like a longshoreman, like a dock worker for a little while. Right. Yeah, I always thought he was some kind of like he was a dock worker / he was in the Navy for a minute and might have got drummed out for being insubordinate or something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Something along those lines.
And then he just becomes a bar owner in Metropolis.
Right.
And he's a key character. He's the reason I'm bringing him up is because he is, I think, how he represents how the city sees Superman. Right? Because everybody knows him. Everybody right? Like Jimmy has a relationship with him that's friendly. Right. Lois is a romantic relationship with him. Right. Everybody knows him as Clark. In some capacity. So everybody encounters him in that way. But I think Bibbo gets to see, like, he's his number one fan.
Right.
And sees him, I think, as the way that the rest of the citizens of Metropolis and the rest of the world sees him. Where, like, they idolize him. And they're just thankful he's around and helping out. They really believe in him.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I think, again, getting back to Tomasi, I think Tomasi's adaptation of Death of Superman has that really nice bit about, and Bibbo say the prayer? Doesn't Bibbo say the prayer for him? Yeah, which is a really wonderful moment. I think it's great. Mm-hmm. But I mean, Bibbo usually is played for laughs, but not always. Sometimes he's, I think there's a story or two where Superman's either lost his powers or exposed to kryptonite, and Bibbo's like right there to, like, put his arm around Superman and prop him up and get him out of whatever, there's a fair amount of those stories where he's like, happens to be there because he wants to see his, his idol, because you're my favorite, that kind of thing. But yeah, I think that Bibbo's important just from the standpoint of, I always feel like he's kind of like he's the hometown crowd for Superman. I think there's always, that guy's always going to be in his corner no matter what. Not that the rest of the cast isn't, but I think, that's one of those things with Bibbo is just kind of like, I think, he's great in the animated series. He's, like I said, he's good in the Tomasi adaptation. He's good in the comics. Yeah. He's a fun character. So
that moment in Death of Superman is my favorite Bibbo moment ever.
Oh, sure.
When they get the news that Superman is dead, and then he like drops to his knees and he starts praying, and he's like, God, why did you take him?
Right.
You could have taken me. Why did you take Superman? Like, right. I love that bit. Yeah.
That's a great bit. No, remember, I think I told you this. I talked to Tomasi about the adaptation, and I said, that's a great bit. And he looks at me, he goes, I had to fight for that. They didn't want me to put that in there. And I was like, are you joking? That part's amazing. It's such a good part. So,
what was this adaptation?
The Death of Superman is the one where the recent one, the animated one.
The second time they did it. So Superman Doomsday is the first movie that they ever did, but then what year was it? 2016, 2017, they did Death of Superman as a 2-part movie.
Right, followed by Rebirth.
Again, so that's the one. Tomasi did the script for the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
It's very, very good.
But that's when he's like, no, I had to fight for that. They didn't want me to put that in there. And I was kind of like, you got to be kidding me. Because that's a great moment. It's really, really well done. It's a great adaptation as well. I think they do a really good job with it overall.
All right. So my mini question here is, who's the supporting character MVP? You can't say Lois.
Okay.
Maybe I should say you guys can't say Jimmy too, but I'll leave it Jimmy.
So you're just gonna rule out everybody except for Bibbo, so we all have to say Bibbo.
Everybody has to say Bibbo.
Okay.
Supporting MVP. Whoever wants to go first.
I'll do hard mode to myself and not say Jimmy.
Okay.
Right.
I will say the Kents jointly.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can't separate them.
Sure. Understandable. Frank, how about you?
I'm going to say Crypto. We didn't talk about Crypto.
Oh, we didn't talk about Crypto.
Yeah.
Now that I think about
dog.
Yeah. We named the dog Crypto. Yeah, I would go Crypto. Crypto's one of I love Crypto. Totally love Crypto.
Crypto is great.
Yeah.
And I will give some love to Perry, because I will say, Perry and Clark are just the two characters I wish had more screen time together.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to see one of those moments where, like, late at night, Perry's still there and he has a moment with Clark, like, hey, Kent, come in here. They sit down, have a drink, and talk, history and journalism now and how it was different and how, etc. I think there's some stuff to be done there. There's
sure.
Father, son, mentor, tutor, kind of relationship that could be explored more a little bit there. So I will say for potential, Perry. So,
okay.
All right, Frank. Gotcha. So we're going to get into it now because you bring up the Legion. This is your shot. This is your moment now. You can go all in on the Legion. So my question is here. So we're talking about Superman's upbringing in continuity. So this is complicated. I think what a lot of listeners may not know is that there is a portion in the comic books where Clark, as Superboy, gets to go into the 30th century and hangs out with the Legion of Superheroes for a little while.
Right.
Spends a lot of time there. And I think I explain it that way just to kind of bring everybody up, because if you are a fan of Superman or Superman from other media, you don't see that often. Right? You may get the Legion for an episode or two in like the animated series or Smallville or something like that. You'll get some nod to it and everything, right? Unless you watch the Legion of Superheroes show.
But even then, he's Superman, not Superboy.
Right. So I bring it up because we've had some debates offline about like what's better, Superman just staying in Smallville the whole time or Superman going into the 30th century. So Frank, I'll give you the floor. Legion's your thing.
Legion is my thing.
Sell me.
To me, it's as simple as a teenage fan club and the fact that he's able to join them and sort of, granted, I think a lot of times, they never really say it, but, it's kind of, I'm sure they mind wipe him, or they do something so he doesn't remember, or maybe he does. Sometimes it's played as he totally does remember. And one of the things I think is great about Superman, it never goes to his head that, wow, I'm going to have a legacy that lasts 1,000 years. There's going to be a group of kids across the galaxy that come together to do what I do. And still, it's not going to be a situation where, if it never becomes hubris. He never gets prideful. His ego doesn't get involved. But at the same time, this is what is, Superman still thought of 1,000 years in the future. Not Batman, not all these characters. Like there's no Batman museum 1,000 years in the future. There's a Superman one.
Right.
Even in the future, you pop out that S that stands for hope, and and people still know who you're talking about, right? They know exactly who that person is,
right?
And I think that's important. But also the main thing is, I think so much of that time, as we've talked about, is Superboy is in Smallville, and he's fighting a young Lex Luthor, and there's people that have powers and stuff, but it's not the same as like being able to run around with these kids, that have powers like he does, and he has friends that have, can kind of understand what he's going through. And I think that for that, I think it's really important that the Legion is there. That's my thing. I think the fact that the Legion, now granted, when they first try to bring him in, they basically haze him.
Right. Right. This is in the 50s.
They're jerks.
Right. Yeah, they're jerks. They give him a bunch of trials that he has to try and overcome, and he's unable to because they rig it.
Right.
So, there's that aspect of it too, where they're like, no, we're going to mess with you and then we'll let you in, which, as kids do. But I've always enjoyed the idea of, he helps form the Justice League, sure, but there's also this group that's going to outlive all of them, and he's going to be a part of it before he becomes Superman.
Right. Clifton, what's your take?
I've never actually read much of that type of the Legion stories. The Legion I read was much later, where it's the stuff kind of independent of Superman. In those days, the ones I read were from 10 years ago when Supergirl was with the Legion.
Right.
I guess,
sure.
10 to 15 years ago, somewhere in there. Several runs on it were good in the mid 2000s.
Are you talking about the Wade and Kitson?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then where that went to become Supergirl in the Legion after that.
Right.
So that's most of my familiarity with those characters. But I mean, just to point out, you're talking about kind of a fork in Superboy storytelling of whether that happened or not. Of whether he went to the future and lived this whole adventure with these future kids for a while and then came back with that as part of him, or he didn't. And then it's interesting though, because Superboy himself is a fork on storytelling, which I think is worth pointing out, where there's tons of avenues of storytelling where Superman isn't Superman until he's an adult in Metropolis, that he wasn't doing all the Smallville stuff.
Right.
Which I think is interesting. But my take, though, is if you're going to do the Smallville stuff, if you're going to have the Superboy that was, in the, the early 90s show?
Right.
Even before Smallville, the live action syndicated show that I grew up on. When you're going to do all that stuff, might as well go for Legion. Why not?
Right.
I'm just go all out with it.
I agree with you there. If you were going to put Clark in costume as a teenager,
right,
and say he's Superboy, then by all means, you might as well go all in, right? And send him to the 30th century so he can hang out with Chameleon Boy, and and all of those guys,
and Bouncy Boy,
of course.
I've seen both done really well. I've seen it just him in Smallville, and I don't mean just as Superboy. My preference is he's just Clark in Smallville,
right?
And that's how he's brought up. That's my preference,
right?
And he doesn't don the identity of Superman until he gets to Metropolis.
Exactly. Right. I've seen that done very, very well at times, and I've seen that done very, very badly at times. And I've seen him go to the Legion, and I've seen that be fantastic. And I could get way behind those stories, and I can understand why people fall in love with him. And I've seen it also where it makes no sense.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I mean, just with so much of comics, I think anything else, it just depends. What's your take? Do you have a good take on it? And what's he there for? But I think the reason I kind of err on the other side is like he's either a kid from Kansas or he's not.
Right. Sure.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's just so important to who he is that suddenly when you make it bigger and he's aware of the legacy that he's going to have, I just don't know how you stay humble.
You're Superman.
Of course, but it's like, you know what I mean? But I think that's also partly why you do get those instances where like Saturn Girl, who's a telepath, like wipes his memory when he goes back. So like you can't remember any of this stuff. And so I think that's a little bit too. So like he doesn't have the weight of that on his shoulders.
Sure.
In a way, but you know, but it's just, I don't know, like it's just kind of funny to me. I have a hard time getting past the idea that like he goes there and he's like, oh, you're telling me I'm going to be really good at this.
Right.
But you're remembering me 1,000 years later. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's one of those things where like they don't. I mean, there are stories where it's kind of like we can't let Superman or Superboy know, you know, how this all turns out. That happens too.
It will change his future.
Right. That does occur, but yeah, I firmly come down on he could be both and be okay. Yep. Absolutely. Like I have no issue with the idea of him being a kid from Smallville, and then also, oh yeah, by the way, welcome to the future. So yeah, I have no issues.
So, mini question time. We're gonna go with the glasses here.
Okay.
All right.
Are we a fan of the glasses, or like are we a fan that that's enough to keep the secret identity at bay? Keep people like no, he's Clark, and Superman's a whole different person.
Right.
Again, we talked about it a little bit last week with the whole shrugging the shoulders and then slouching, and I don't know. I don't know if the glasses are just enough because I've seen it obviously done well enough that, you know, it's a posture thing. It's a little bit of, you know, I don't know if he had to be like, you know, Bruce. I don't know. I'm sure there's a story somewhere where Bruce was in an off-Broadway, you know, off somewhere show of like Oklahoma or something where he got like his acting skills from. Like, granted, Alfred did some of it, I'm sure.
Right.
But, you know, just that whole thing of did that happen or not happen? But
yeah, like Bruce is studying Stanislav method somewhere.
right, exactly.
to create the Bruce persona, yeah.
Right, somewhere there's a bit of, you know, Bruce is always, you know, oh, you have to say yes. You always have to say yes. In his performance, you know, that kind of thing. But no, I think with Clark, there definitely was something along those lines of like having to learn, you know, like whether even mom and pa can't just being like, no, son, they're going to know full well it's you if you stand up straight or, you know, if you know, whatever. So yeah, I think the glasses work if he does the other stuff. The glasses by themselves, maybe not.
What about you, Clifton?
I'm fine with just the glasses. Because I mean, like this, the posturing and the stuff you're talking about, that's not much. That's just subtle things, and that's fine. I've seen people try to like, you know, get into explanations like he can contort like individual muscles of his face to like look just slightly different because he has superhuman ability to control like the smallest of muscles, or you know, or he vibrates his face really fast, so it's just kind of blurry to people. I've seen like all those explanations, and I don't need those at all.
Yeah, me too.
Like what it comes down to for me though is, and I'll bring up, like I talked to our engineer actually as a point. He won't be appearing in robot form on this episode, but I'll relay some of his thoughts. And it comes down to something I've thought too. And I'm going to use Tony Hawk as an example, because I don't know if people follow Tony Hawk online, on social media, wherever. He relates his like interactions with people all the time. Where like one I can think of is he was at an airport, gave the attendant his passport. The attendant reads the passport and says, "Tony Hawk, oh, like that skater." And Tony Hawk's like, "Yeah, like just like that skater."
Right.
And the guy like looks at him. He's like, "Oh, like you kind of look like him too." And that's it. Because the guy wasn't expecting to see Tony Hawk. Like
exactly.
And Clark, like nobody expects Superman to have another identity. It's just like he's Superman. He's everywhere. He's all over the planet all at once. Like, why would Superman be doing something else? So I think at best you'd have people being like, that guy kind of looks like Superman.
Yep. Right.
You put wholeheartedly my thoughts on it, Clifton. Like I think the glasses are enough.
Right.
I do think you would be surprised how different somebody can look sometimes with just combing their hair differently and putting a pair of glasses on. I mean, the example I use is like if Brad Pitt walks in the room right now, I don't think, hey, Brad Pitt walked in the room. I think that guy looked like Brad Pitt because I think why would Brad Pitt be here?
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first thing. Yeah. So, yeah.
And there is a video of Henry Cavill doing it.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's around the time of when Man of Steel had come out and he was doing the junket circuit.
Under a poster.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like under a billboard of Man of Steel. And like,
yeah, he went out in New York City with glasses on to be like, it works. So I'm fine with it. It's fun.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I'm for it. I'm pro glasses. All right, so let's get into, I think, a little bit of the creation a bit. Superman's had a lot of fantastic creators over 85 years. Who are some of the standouts for you guys? We've well, you know what? Let's go ahead. Let's start with Kurt Swan. He's the obvious one. He's come up a few times in both episodes. He was a longtime Superman artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sort of the quintessential Superman in a lot of people's eyes. In a lot of people's eyes, you say picture Superman, it's a Kurt Swan drawing.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I love the guy. Love his stuff. It was one of those things where I remember, again, reading those digest comics of Legion and Superman and Jimmy. That's where I first was like, okay, I like this. It's one of those things where it's not, it's definitely not slick. It's definitely not modern, but there's a certain humanity that Kurt Swan and emotion that Kurt Swan gets across for not being the most dynamic penciler in the world.
Right.
So yeah, I love Kurt Swan. Again, he's, there's a reason. I think Alan, when they do whatever, whatever happened to Man of Tomorrow, when they wrap up right after Crisis, the end of that stuff, there's a reason why Kurt Swan was the one they did it with.
Right. That's when we did we mention that one last week?
Yeah.
I think
we mentioned it slightly last week.
Yeah.
But yeah, where it's like the swan song to Superman, like an era. It's a swan song to an era of Superman is what they're what Alan Moore's kind of putting to bed. And that era being the Silver Age into the Bronze Age.
Right.
And that Kurt Swan was the artist for that whole period, among other artists. But he was, if you read Superman from 1950 into the 70s, he was your Superman. He was your Superman creator.
Yep, for sure.
And I mean, worth saying that, I think his style did not change very much in that period.
No,
I can't think of anybody who has been drawing so long, been doing art so long, and it's and his Superman looked just timeless always, no matter if you're looking at 1950s or if you're looking at the 70s stuff.
Right. But yeah, Kurt Swan, if there's a Mount Rushmore for Superman artists, especially that guy's on it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? Who else? Notable creators out there that really left their thumbprint on Superman.
Well, I've talked about it a bunch, but John Byrne, for sure.
Yeah.
Byrne is basically handed, after Crisis, he's handed Superman and said, go ahead and read. After doing, Uncanny X-Men at Marvel and doing Fantastic Four and having a great run on that, he's able to come over to DC and do, Legends he does the art with, and I think he co-plots with, if I remember correctly. He might have been a co-plotter on it as well. But then he also comes again and does Superman. So, it's one of those things where a lot of the more, it's hard to say from something from 86 is modern, but a lot of the take of Superman, a lot of the idea of Clark and Superman being a little more on an even playing field, especially with Lois. I know Marv Wolfman came up with the concept of businessman Lex, but at the same time, Byrne does a lot with it. There was a push at the time when Byrne came on to basically have Superman be the only surviving Kryptonian.
The literal last son of Krypton.
Literal last son of Krypton.
Yep.
And a lot of those elements that so there's no Supergirl, there's no Krypto, there's no, a lot of the Silver Age stuff sort of goes away. No, they kind of put a button on the Legion stuff in a way during Byrne's run. Again, people argue whether that was that did we gain something from that or do we lose something from that? A lot of people point to, because of the Zack Snyder stuff and the way that the end of Man of Steel, people point to Byrne's run to like, well, that's what happened with the Kryptonian villains in that run. So therefore, Superman's a killer. That's that whole thing, which I think is awful.
Yeah.
There's a handful of stories versus 85 years of him not being. So you do the math.
That's the argument I give. Like, okay, you got one story where he does it. I have thousands. Right. I have thousands where he doesn't.
Where he doesn't. And again, that was the other thing I'll put a thing on the Legion is the Legion has a code of not killing, and that's because Superman didn't kill.
Right.
That's another thing about the Legion that I think is important, is the idea that the values that Superman put forth as being a superhero is what they carry into the future. And that's important because, again, we've seen stories of where Superman's values are kind of scoffed at or kind of thought of as corny or old hat or, not realistic. But 1,000 years in the future, there's a group of kids that are like, no, that it's important that we keep that tradition going.
Yeah, I agree. I think Byrne is a really important creator. He is mentioned quite often. I mean, it's not like he's forgotten about. That's right. That's not the case. But I do think on some level, it's not appreciated enough. I mean, first of all, he wrote and did the art. Yeah. Which, he was on 2 books for a while. Right. Right. He was drawing the main Superman book, and then he did, was it Adventures Super? No, he did I'm sorry, you're right. He did the Action Comics, which was the team-up book for a while. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because Marv Wolfman was doing Adventures for a while.
That's impressive.
Superman. Sure.
That's really impressive. I mean, that's impressive today.
Yeah. For sure. But I would say, who else? Another one that's important, I would say, is Jurgens. I don't think Jurgens gets a lot of credit. Granted, I think the Doomsday, stuff was obviously sales-driven, but again, someone has to tell those stories. Right. And then Doomsday, whether you love it or hate it, it was huge at the time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was one of those, I'm gonna put my kid through college with these copies of Superman's death. Don't
open the bag.
Don't open that. Yeah, right. No, don't open that one with the armband. Don't do that. And again, I think he was a solid storyteller of Superman for a long, long time.
Yeah. It's a fun era too. Like Louise Simonson on books too, right? Yep. Around that era.
Yeah, the time of the triangles to keep track of how you're supposed to read the 4 Superman. That's the thing. Think about it this way. Superman had 4 books a month. Wasn't there 4 books at the height, I think it was?
Mm. Yeah.
That had 4 different creative teams telling one cohesive story, especially after around the time of the death of Superman.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going back to the 70s, it'd be Elliot S. Maggin is another one that's big, or I want to say E. Nelson Bridwell. I'm trying to think of my Bronze Age writers. Mm-hmm. Carrie Bates wrote a bunch. I think Carrie Bates is the one that wrote the why does there? I think it's him. Why does there have to be a Superman? Let me look that up for I'm quoting the wrong person. But that's a big 70s story. Elliot, and I know for the Bronze Age stuff, Elliot S. Maggin wrote this story about who was the Green Lantern that was supposed to be in charge of Krypton.
Mm.
Okay.
Whose sector that was. That's a good one too. And you find out that it's actually a Green Lantern that we have seen on camera.
Right.
It's a fairly big name. So
right.
A lot of those stories are great from the 70s. But again, I think it was one of the things where I don't think there was one particular writer that was on it for a really long time, but I could be wrong because, again, I haven't read a ton of those books from that time.
You can say who the Lantern of Krypton is.
Oh, sure. It was Tomar Ree.
Right.
Yeah. Or Tomar Ray, depending on
right.
which pronunciation. But yeah, but apparently the Elliot S. Maggin story was based on an idea by Neil Adams.
Oh, okay. Right.
But again, that's the idea that was something that people were like, oh yeah, that's a question. That's a good question. There should have been someone that kept Krypton in their sector.
Mm-hmm.
They had them in their sector, and then, Krypton still meets its end. So,
Clifton, what about you?
I'm going to bring up just a couple artists that had impacts outside of the normal Superman comics. And the first one's George Perez, who, impact through Crisis. So, I don't know how much George Perez did with Superman specifically over the years, apart from Crisis, but Crisis is a story, that touched everyone of a generation reading comics at that time. And the cover, the depiction of Superman holding Supergirl, that's an image that I think he's imprinted on a lot of kids of that era.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was Perez.
Yeah.
And so, and you can't deny just like what the impact of Crisis was, and like his art in that is phenomenal of drawing like, every character imaginable and the multiple Supermans that he draws in that story from the various worlds. Definitely a pivotal Superman moment in comics, I think.
Oh yeah.
And then the other one is actually outside of comics per se, and that's Jose Luis Garcia Lopez.
Yeah, I meant to mention him.
And while most of his work that everybody knows, they don't know is his work because in the early 80s, he had drawn the style guide. So he drew like turnarounds for every DC character.
Right.
That was then used for all of the merchandising. So lunch boxes, t-shirts, toys, coloring books, whatever you can think of.
Right.
When you would see those depictions of the DC characters, and Superman was, probably Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, I imagine, as always, were all over all the merchandising.
Right.
You were looking at Jose Luis Garcia Lopez depictions of them. So again, it's what people think of as these characters was him, who didn't read the comics at the time, but loved the characters and collected this stuff, or went to school with the lunchbox or whatever.
Yeah, all good ones. All good ones. We talked to Alan Moore last episode. Some of the classic stories. I think hard pressed not to name Alan Moore for Superman.
Right.
He's done a lot of good ones. Grant Morrison, along the same lines. Grant Morrison has done sort of the modern classic,
right,
that everybody knows, an All-Star Superman.
Yeah.
But notable too. I mean, he wrote Justice League for a long time, and it was really, really good. And he was
right.
We joke around like he was the one that actually made the electric blue Superman like kind of cool in places.
Yeah, it works.
It's not just our opinion. That is an accepted opinion. I've noticed.
Yeah,
he's the one person that made it work.
Yeah,
the electric blue stunt.
So yeah, I mean, he's a good one. I think. I mean, even though it's not a Superman book per se, but man, Kingdom Come gets lumped in as a Superman story all the time.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I'm throwing Mark Waid in there, Mark Waid, Alex Ross. I mean, like, people love Kingdom Come. It's a good book.
Yeah,
I like it too, but I understand, like, he's an anchor of that book for sure.
Right.
But I've seen that one a lot of times, like, best Superman stories. It's like Kingdom Come. And I'm like, okay, well, kind of a DC story to me, but
yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is that Wade says about that book is when he read, we talk about Crisis, he's like, I'm not knocking Crisis. I'm not knocking what Marv Wolfman and George Perez did. But, to him, it was like every panel, it was, Blue Devil talking to Adam, talking to Lightning Lad. And he's like, I didn't feel like there was a character that tied it all together. And he's like, when I wrote Kingdom Come, he's like, I wanted to anchor it in something that I knew that I could have a main character or a character that would, be the through line. And he's like, Superman was that character for me.
Right.
That's why it's a much more, he feels like it's a much more personal story. Whereas, Crisis is a lot more, and Crisis does have a lot more beats of just, a couple panels with this character. But it's written for me, it's written so well that in that couple panels, you get the character's personality, even if you don't read those books. And a lot of times, characters I didn't know about, I'm like, well, I want to know more about this character. I'll seek them out. So
yeah, I mean, and Wade, Birthright is another one I see that people talk about all the time too, about sort of like one of the definitive origin tellings that's out there. Mark Waid is one of those writers that, like, man, I just wish he did more in the character.
Yeah,
I mean, saying that as he's writing World's Finest right now, currently,
right. Yeah, I'd be very surprised if what we get with James Gunn's younger version of Superman isn't Birthright. I'd be very surprised. I'm not. I don't. It's not my favorite Wade piece. It's not my favorite Superman origin story. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying it's not my favorite personally. There are things I do like about it, but I'd be very, very shocked if that's not the blueprint for it.
He's just a writer I hold in a very high regard, and I think he gets the character really, really well. And, I've been at cons where I've seen him get choked up, talk about Silver Age Superman stories where he's like, he acknowledges like, this is so stupid what I'm saying, but like, he's actually like choking up, talking about like a story where, the IRS deems Superman doesn't owe back taxes because like his, because like just the way that he's helped out and saved so many people over the world, like has paid his taxes essentially.
Right.
And he's like, I'm serious. I mean, it's an actual panel I sat through, and he's talking about this story, and he's like literally getting choked up. Mm-hmm. He's like, this is what Superman means to me.
Yeah.
So he's one, like, yeah, please. I would love to see him write Superman for like 4 years. That'd be awesome.
No, Wade's great. I'm a huge fan of Wade. I first, found him on Flash, and I've been a fan of his stuff ever since. I'm looking forward to his, to plug something that's coming up, the story that he's going to do about the last days of Lex Luthor. That whole thing that he's got coming up for Black Label at DC sounds great.
Yeah,
sounds like a very Silver Age story done probably in a modern way. I can't wait for it. So
yeah, no, I can't wait for that one either. It sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds great. So all right, so let's start closing out on what we did last week. So last week we ended up on classic Superman stories. Let's start closing out on lesser known favorites of ours. The ones that's not All-Star Superman and For the Man Who Has Everything and stuff like that you would find on lists pretty easily.
It's going to be a little weird. For my recommendation, I'm completely cheating here. I'm completely 100% cheating on this. And I'm going to recommend Supreme by Alan Moore.
Okay.
Which are some of the best Superman stories I've ever read, despite the fact that they're not actually about Superman.
Right.
And it was the Image comic in the 90s when Alan Moore was doing some work over at Image. He picked up for a time on Rob Liefeld's Superman ripoff character Supreme, or pastiche character, tribute character, homage character, whatever you want to call it. So Alan Moore took up time writing on Supreme and made it a crazy good Superman book. If you just kind of squint a little bit.
Right.
And I always described it to people as Alan Moore's All-Star Superman, where it was him kind of like Grant Morrison did later with All-Star Superman, just taking a lot of Superman ideas from over the years and kind of analyzing them, kind of being a little bit meta with them, or a lot meta sometimes in some of the issues. But yeah, I mean, he presents like a love letter to all these years of Superman. It's just not a Superman book.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, I would recommend it to people. I remember one time when I worked at the comic shop that Frank and I used to work at, and Zach came in, Zach, and we're asking what you should read next by Alan Moore, because you hadn't read too much by that point in time of Alan Moore, and you were just looking for something else to read. And Supreme's what I picked up off the shelf and handed you. And I think you thought I was joking.
Yeah. Well, it's hard. I mean, like at the time, it was like Rob Liefeld is like, you can't see past it for a bit.
Right.
Like, wait a minute, really?
Yeah.
Right.
But no, I've read it since. It's terrific.
Yeah. It's good Superman stories, right?
It's somehow like modern Superman and somehow Silver Age Superman, like in the same issue.
Yeah, it's a great balance.
Times.
It's such a good balance of storytelling.
Yeah.
It's just not Superman though, but it is some great Superman stories if you squint.
Yeah, it's just not actually Superman, but it's all there.
It is, and it's not. It's not, but it is.
He's an analog of Clark Kent. He's right.
Yeah. It's great. Love that one.
Yeah, Supreme is fantastic.
It really is.
And they collected that in a couple trades. You may still be able to get it at a convention or eBay or something. I doubt they're still in print.
Right.
Yep.
But it was Supreme Story of the Year and Supreme The Return are the name of the collection volumes.
Frank, how about you? I know you got a few.
I've got one.
Okay.
This one's going to be, again, I'll go with Clifton. It's going to be a little weird, but it is actually a Superman story.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
but it's a Superman and Spider-Man story.
Oh, interesting.
It's the Marvel Treasury Edition number 28, Superman and Spider-Man. Not the first one. I like the first one, but I really love the second one. I think the second one is a lot more fun because they're going up against Doom and the Parasite, which I think is a weird combo.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I love that one.
Who are the creators on that?
It's got, I'm looking at it right now. It's written by Jim Shooter and Marv Wolfman.
Okay.
Penciled by John Buscema. And then inkers are like Terry Austin, Klaus Janson, Bob Layton, Steve Leohola. Basically like Bob McLeod. Anybody that was there in the bullpen, it sounds like they handed them like, you do it. You do the next couple pages.
Yep.
But yeah, it's got Hulk, it's got Wonder Woman in it. It's one of those things where it's a rare thing of you get to see characters that, Spider-Man and Wonder Woman teaming up, for a little bit. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing of like, oh, I'd never think that. I'm sure if there was, if Marvel team up had been allowed to go multiversal, we would have gotten that. But I love that one. I think it's just fun because it's a fun, again, it's a fun mix of characters, but also has Superman in it. Mm-hmm. And it's always cool to see, when a character has to basically be up against Superman. That's one of the things I love about that. We talked about not as much, but I'll talk more about that if I get another choice. DC Comics Presents, just the idea of, we talked about a little bit last episode, was just the idea of when you put a character up against Superman, what does that do to that character? And I don't mean like physically or fighting him. I just mean like, in the same room, in the same panel, in the same story with Superman.
Yeah.
So that's my choice. I'd go with that one. That one's a lot of fun.
I've seen those books my whole life. I've never read those stories.
No, never?
Yeah, never.
Yeah, that book, for a long time, they had the one that was a DC Marvel that was the collection one was out of print. I don't know if it's back in print or not, but it was out of print for a long time. But yeah, those are fun.
Nice.
I think I loaned those to you, Zach, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. But I'm always a fan of a Treasury. I loved them as a kid. I love them now, so.
I went with, as my first choice, a John Byrne issue. So picking Superman Volume 2, number 10, which is the Super Menace of Metropolis.
Okay.
And so this one, it's Superman's powers start to go out of control. He's like seeing his coworkers like as skeletons in the Daily Planet.
Oh, yeah.
Right? He's like ripping, doors off the hinges and stuff like that. And his heat vision starts going off, and it's like so intense that like his own body can't hold it back. Like it's hurting his hands and his eyelids and stuff. So he runs and he tries to get away so his powers don't hurt anybody. And as he's trying to get away, he's attacked by this like metal clad robot creature named Clash with a K. Clash and two A's.
Of course.
And so you think it's a robot, but like Superman is also like he's Clash is covered in lead. So he's like, I can't see through this thing, so I can't like verify that this is a robot attacking me and not like a person in a suit. So like he can't like actually like hit the thing full force because he's afraid that somebody may be in there that he might kill them. Right. So he's just trying to like kind of contain this thing as like his powers are going nuts in it. So it's like the worst day of his life. Right.
Right.
With his powers going nuts, and then and he's having to contend with this robot thing. And meanwhile, like the people in Metropolis like just think Superman snapped and gone nuts. And, and is attacking the city and everything. So he's trying to sort of like get a hold of all of those things while like trying to figure out like what's happening with his powers at the same time. It's such a great like single issue book. I love it. And like for me, it's always like it's kind of in a weird way. It's kind of an analog of like when you have to go to work but you're having a sick day.
Right.
Right. You know what I mean? You're like, I don't want to be here, but I have to be here. Yeah. And you're just miserable. Yeah, it's such a good book. I absolutely love that story. So, you guys have any more?
I think I mentioned before. This one I think we did single issues. Hitman 34. That one's always good. Okay. By Garth Ennis and John McCrae, which is the Tommy Monahan is Hitman. Hence the title. Is up on a rooftop and runs into Superman on a day where Superman is having a bad day. And then just the idea of what Superman means to people and how important he is. And it's a great book. It's one of my favorites. If I find it anywhere, I usually pick it up, even though I have multiple copies of it at this point. It's just one of those books that I'm like, nope. When people are like, oh, Superman's boring. I don't understand what's so big great about Superman. I'm like, this one explains it really, really well.
Yeah. I think Superman and Gen 13 is another really good one for that.
Oh, I love Superman Gen 13.
Yeah.
Again, if you have any questions about why Superman's great, that one's a good one too. And again, it's as I said before, it's one of those things where I'm like, Adam, as much as fantastic an artist as Adam Hughes is, his writing on that is just so good.
Yeah.
He should write more.
I will. I'm gonna throw Superman Kryptonite into there.
Okay.
Which is a Darwin Cook piece that he did for a title called Superman Confidential for a little while in like the mid 2000s. And Tim Sale's the artist on this one, and it's really, really good. And surprisingly, for a book titled Kryptonite, this book has some really, really interesting, inventive ways of making Superman hurt that doesn't involve kryptonite. And one of my favorite bits, it's one of my favorite like Ma and Pa Kent bits ever, comes from this book where, he's explaining, having to deal with like stopping a volcano from erupting. And he's explained like it's sort of like a moment. It's like the first time Clark thinks he's going to die actually being Superman, doing something. And it's just a great moment of his dad being like, I don't want your mom to worry, please, like, don't, you can talk to me about that stuff all you want, please, I want you to, but he's like, I don't want you to talk about this stuff in front of your mom because she worries enough as it is, and I just like, I love that moment. And it's such a great book, and it's like, nobody talks about that book ever. I don't know why. It's so good. So yeah, I'll say that one. I'll say For All Seasons also. It's another really
it's a good one.
It's like a classic, but also not. Like, it doesn't come up that much.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's a Jeff Loeb, Tim Sale book from I think '98. I want to say they did it in between sort of the Long Halloween pieces.
Right.
So like Long Halloween came out first, then they did this, and then I think they did Dark Victory, and this is another really great one, and I think notable in the way that each issue is done from a different character's perspective. So it's like Pa Kent is the narrator of the first issue, and then it's like Lois in the second one, and I think Lex is number 3. I think that sounds right. And I think it's Lana for the fourth one. Could be wrong. I think it's Lana though. And it's another like really like fantastic looking book. I mean, like it's some of Sale's best art ever.
Okay.
In that story, and yeah, it's just a great, like, you want to feel great reading Superman, like, and optimistic and happy and feel like you should try better and try and do good out there. Like, this is one of those books, I think. As you should reading Superman. I think that's what the like the best Superman stories like make me feel that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anything we left out? Any last thoughts?
I'll go with one just real quick. And I thought about this when I couldn't remember what it was. I found it though. Superman 156 from 1962. This is not a hoax, not a dream, but real. The Last Days of Superman.
Oh yeah,
it's a great.
That's
great
a really good one.
Great Edmund Hamilton, Kurt Swan story in which Superman is taking care of a satellite, gets exposed to green kryptonite, but he also gets exposed to a thing called Virus X, which was basically a virus from Krypton. And it's basically, one of those early Superman is dying and what's he going to do with his last days stories.
Okay.
And then, it's a combination of people both being upset, some people being thrilled that he's going to die, but at the same time, Superman being Superman all the way to the bitter end. Again, if it's a story, if you like, how the tenacity or the heroic, basically in the face of death, Superman is still Superman stories. That's a great one. The other one I thought of real quick was, I believe it's Superman Beyond, if I remember correctly, by Grant Morrison. We talked a little bit about him earlier and how great he is on Superman. Yeah, Final Crisis, Superman Beyond 1 and 2. And those are great stories. You get a lot of multiversal Superman meeting. And then, of course, Superman, Doug Monkey does the art. But yeah, really, really good. I love the end of it. It's really kind of a nice bit of, when the world is falling apart, what does that mean to Superman?
Right. And not much else is remembered from the Final Crisis story days. So there's one good thing.
Well,
there's one good thing you can glean from that era, from that event.
Yeah.
Nice.
But that one's great. That's a great. It's 2 issues. It's great. Love the end. Like I said, the ending of it is one of my favorite Superman bits ever, just because of what it says about Superman.
Right.
So
awesome. No, I think we got some good ones in there.
Mm-hmm.
Good list from a couple different eras too, which I think is kind of key. Kind of shows the timelessness of the character, which is the whole point of these episodes.
Yep.
He's 85, and he'll probably he's gonna outlive all of us.
Right.
All right, so that's it for Superman's 85th anniversary. As always, we'll post links and examples to everything we talk about on letmeknowhowitis.com. If you like the show, you can check out all of our episodes on letmeknowhowitis.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Just please, however you find us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And if you want to suggest a topic, let us know in the comments, Twitter, or email us at info@letmeknowhowitis.com. And we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.